The crack of a gunshot echoed through the Montana sky as Sarah Miller ducked behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. It wasn't supposed to end like this. 5 hungry children waiting at a ramshackle cabin while she desperately searched for work in the unforgiving town of Copper Creek. The year was 1885, and the West had shown her no mercy since her husband's passing 3 months prior. "Hold your fire," Sarah shouted, her voice carrying across the dusty road. "I'm just passing through." The tall figure stepped from the shadow of the general store, rifle lowered but not holstered. "Madam, you're trespassing on private property." Sarah slowly stood, brushing the dirt from her worn calico dress. "I was told Mr. Thompson needed a cook at his ranch. I mean no harm." The man's eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Wingate at the Mercantile. Said his children needed proper care and feeding." Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. This job was her last hope. The stranger's shoulders relaxed slightly as he lowered his rifle completely. "I'm Thomas Thompson, and Mrs. Wingate should mind her own business." Sarah's breath caught. This was the man she traveled 5 miles on foot to find, the wealthy rancher whose wife had died last winter. His reputation preceded him. Stubborn as a mule, proud as a stallion, and nearly impossible to work for. "Sarah Miller, sir." She extended her hand, which he ignored. "I don't need charity cases, Mrs. Miller." "It's Miss now," she corrected, raising her chin. "And I'm not looking for charity. I'm looking for honest work. I can cook, clean, and care for children better than most." Thomas Thompson studied her with steel blue eyes that had seen too much hardship. His ranch, the Double T, was the largest in the county, and rumor had it he worked from sunrise to sunset, leaving his 3 young children in the care of whoever he could hire. The last 5 housekeepers had quit within a month. 3 meals a day. The house kept in order. The children minded. $5 a week, he said gruffly. Sarah's heart leapt. $5 would feed her children for a month if she was careful. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow. Dawn." He turned to leave, then paused. "The children can be difficult. My Emma is 8, Jonah 6, and little Rebecca just turned 4. Their mother's passing hit them hard." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I understand loss, Mr. Thompson." "Good, because I don't have time for someone who'll run at the first sign of trouble." He gestured toward the road leading east. "The ranch is 3 miles that way. White house with green shutters." As Thomas Thompson walked away, Sarah exhaled slowly. She had secured employment, but now faced a greater challenge: how to care for 3 more children while keeping her own 5 a secret. The rancher clearly wasn't looking to feed 8 hungry mouths. The walk back to her hidden cabin was long, her thoughts heavy with plans and worries. The dilapidated structure she'd found abandoned in the foothills had become their temporary shelter after the bank took their farm in Nebraska. "Mama's home," 10-year-old Peter called as she approached. He was the oldest of her brood, already shouldering responsibilities beyond his years. Sarah's children tumbled out to greet her. Peter, followed by 8-year-old twins Mary and Michael, 6-year-old James, and little Hannah, just 3 years old. Their faces were dirty, but their eyes bright with hope that she'd brought food or good news. "I found work," she announced, gathering them close. "A position at the Double T Ranch cooking for Mr. Thompson and his children." The older ones understood the significance immediately. "Will we go with you?" Mary asked. Sarah knelt to their level. "Not yet, my loves. Mr. Thompson only knows he's hiring a cook, not a mother with 5 children. You'll need to stay here while I work at the ranch during the day." Peter's brow furrowed. "For how long?" "Until I can earn enough to rent a proper place in town, or—" She hesitated. "Until I can tell him the truth." That night, as her children slept huddled together for warmth, Sarah stitched up the holes in her second dress by moonlight. How had life led her here? 2 years ago, they'd been a happy family in Nebraska. Then the drought came, the crops failed, and Richard took ill. By the time winter released its grip on the plains, she was a widow with 5 hungry children and a mountain of debt. The bank had been merciless. With nowhere to go, they journeyed west on the rumors of opportunity, only to find that opportunity in Montana territory came at a steep price, especially for a woman alone. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the eastern mountains as Sarah kissed each sleeping child goodbye. She'd prepared them. Peter was in charge. They were to remain close to the cabin, and under no circumstances were they to venture toward town or the Thompson ranch. "I'll bring food when I can," she promised, leaving their last biscuits for breakfast. "Be good for Peter." The Double T Ranch rose from the valley floor like something from a painting, a sprawling main house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with the finest horses Sarah had seen since leaving Nebraska. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as she approached, she heard the unmistakable sounds of children arguing. She knocked on the front door, straightening her worn bonnet and smoothing her dress. No response came except the escalating shouts from within. She knocked again, louder. The door swung open to reveal a small girl with fiery red hair and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Are you the new cook?" the last one cried when she left. "Emma Thompson. Where are your manners?" Sarah replied firmly. "That's no way to greet a guest." The child's eyes widened in surprise before narrowing suspiciously. "How do you know my name?" "Your father told me. Now, may I come in? I believe I'm expected." Emma stepped aside reluctantly. The house's interior revealed both wealth and neglect: fine furniture covered in dust, expensive curtains hanging askew, toys and clothes scattered across every surface. A small boy, Jonah, she presumed, peeked around the corner, a wooden horse clutched in one hand. Behind him toddled little Rebecca, her face smeared with what appeared to be jam. "Where is your father?" Sarah asked, already assessing the work ahead. "With the horses," Emma replied. "He's always with the horses." Sarah removed her bonnet and rolled up her sleeves. "Well then, I suppose we should get acquainted. I'm Miss Miller, and I'll be caring for you and this house from now on." Jonah approached cautiously. "Can you make apple pie?" "Mama used to make apple pie." The mention of their mother softened Sarah's expression. "I make a very fine apple pie. Perhaps we can bake one together someday." Little Rebecca toddled forward and, without warning, wrapped her sticky arms around Sarah's legs. "Hungry," she announced. "First things first," Sarah declared. "Let's get this kitchen in order." The kitchen was a disaster: unwashed dishes piled in the sink, food left to spoil on counters, the wood burning stove cold and filled with ash. Sarah set to work immediately, enlisting Emma and Jonah to help while she tied little Rebecca in a chair with a clean rag to keep her occupied. By mid-morning, the kitchen gleamed, breakfast had been served and cleared, and Sarah was kneading dough for the day's bread when the back door swung open. Thomas Thompson filled the doorframe, his tall figure blocking the sunlight. He stared at the transformed kitchen in disbelief. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah acknowledged without pausing her work. "Your children have been quite helpful this morning." His eyes moved from the clean counters to his unusually well-behaved children. "You've been busy. That's what you're paying me for, sir." She shaped the dough into loaves and placed them in pans to rise. "The children mentioned you take lunch at noon. It will be ready." He seemed momentarily at a loss for words, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Noon, then." As he turned to leave, he added, "The men will come in for lunch too, usually 7 or 8 of them." Sarah's hands stilled. "I wasn't informed I'd be cooking for the ranch hands." "Is that a problem, Miss Miller?" She thought of her own children, waiting at the cabin with barely enough food for the day. More mouths to feed here meant less she could bring home to them. Not at all, she replied evenly. But I'll need more supplies than what I've found in your pantry. Thomas pulled a key from his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. Storerooms behind the kitchen. Take what you need. The storeroom revealed unexpected bounty sacks of flour and sugar, preserved meats, canned vegetables, and dried fruits. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. If she was careful, she could prepare hearty meals for the ranch and still have enough to slip into her apron pockets for her waiting children. By noon, the large kitchen table was laden with hot stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches. The ranch hands filed in, removing their hats and nodding respectfully to Sarah. She served them efficiently, learning names and preferences, storing away details that might prove useful. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his children arranged around him. He ate quickly, saying little, but Sarah noticed how his eyes constantly returned to his children, checking, assessing, worrying in silence. "This is real fine cooking, Miss Miller." One of the older hands, Walter, commented. "Best meal we've had since." The unfinished sentence hung in the air. "Since Mrs. Thompson passed." "Thank you," Sarah replied, deftly changing the subject. "Emma tells me you're expecting new cattle soon?" The men eagerly discussed the upcoming drive, and Sarah continued serving, observing how Thomas remained apart even while seated among them. His isolation was palpable, a man surrounded by people yet entirely alone. As the men filed out to return to work, Thomas lingered. "The children seem to like you." "Children respond to structure and kindness, Mr. Thompson. They've had precious little of either lately, I suspect." His jaw tightened. "I've done my best." "I'm sure you have," she softened her tone. "But children need more than food and shelter. They need attention, conversation, someone to listen to their small concerns." "That's why I hired you," he said gruffly. "To listen to them, yes, but not to replace their father." Thomas pushed back from the table abruptly. "I have work to do, Miss Miller. I'll be back for supper." Sarah watched him stride away, shoulders rigid beneath his worn denim shirt. She'd touched a nerve, but couldn't bring herself to regret it. His children were starving for his attention as surely as her own children were waiting for food. The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity, teaching Emma basic sewing skills, helping Jonah with his letters, and bathing little Rebecca, whose delight in splashing water soon had Sarah's dress soaked through. All the while, her thoughts drifted to her own children, wondering if they'd found berries to supplement their meager breakfast, if Peter was keeping the younger ones from wandering. As the sun began its descent, Sarah prepared supper while discreetly filling her pockets with leftover bread, a small jar of preserves, and a wrapped piece of salt pork. She would need to slip away briefly after the meal to deliver these treasures to her waiting family. Supper was a quieter affair than lunch, just Thomas and his children at the table. Emma chattered about her sewing lesson, Jonah proudly showed his father the letters he'd practiced, and even little Rebecca seemed eager for her father's approval as she displayed relatively clean hands. Thomas listened with evident surprise, his customary gruffness giving way to genuine interest as his children competed for his attention. Sarah served the meal and observed the tentative reconnection, her heart both warmed by the scene and aching for her own children, who had no father to seek approval from. As she cleared the dishes, Sarah planned her escape. "Mr. Thompson, I'll just step out for some fresh air once I've finished here." He looked up from helping Jonah with a difficult word. "It'll be dark soon." "Just a short walk," she assured him. "I find it helps me sleep better." He nodded absently, already pulled back into Jonah's struggle with reading. Sarah finished the dishes quickly, removed her apron, and slipped out the back door. The path to her cabin was familiar enough, even in the gathering dusk. She moved swiftly, aware that every minute away from either set of children was precious time lost. The forest closed around her, the evening sounds of wildlife creating a symphony that masked her footsteps. When she reached the cabin, she found her children huddled together on the single worn mattress, Peter reading to the younger ones by the light of a single candle. Their faces lit up at her appearance. "Mama!" Hannah threw herself into Sarah's arms. "I've brought food," Sarah announced, emptying her pockets. "And tomorrow I'll bring more." They fell upon the offerings like the hungry children they were, and Sarah's heart twisted with both love and sorrow. She couldn't stay long. The Thompson children would be getting ready for bed, and her absence would soon be noticed. "Be good for Peter," she instructed as she always did. "I'll try to come at midday tomorrow." The walk back seemed longer, her steps heavier with the weight of separation. As she approached the ranch house, she saw Thomas on the porch, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight from within. "You were gone a while," he remarked as she climbed the steps. Sarah's heart raced. "The evening was so pleasant. I walked farther than intended." His eyes studied her face, searching for something she couldn't identify. "The children are waiting for you. Apparently there's a bedtime story you promised." She'd made no such promise, but seized the excuse gratefully. "Yes, of course. I shouldn't keep them waiting." As she moved past him into the house, his hand lightly touched her arm. "Miss Miller." She paused, not meeting his eyes. "Be careful walking alone. These hills can be dangerous after dark." His concern seemed genuine, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt for her deception. "I will. Thank you." The bedtime routine with the Thompson children was both familiar and painfully different from her own family's. Emma insisted on braiding her own hair, though she allowed Sarah to tie the ribbons. Jonah wanted his toy horse placed just so beside his pillow. Little Rebecca demanded 3 stories before her eyelids finally grew heavy. By the time Sarah closed Rebecca's door, exhaustion pressed upon her like a physical weight. She found Thomas in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "You look like you could use this," he said, sliding one toward her. Sarah accepted gratefully, sinking into a chair. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall marking the passage of time. "They weren't always so difficult," Thomas said finally. "Before Catherine died, they were different. Happier. Children reflect the emotions around them," Sarah replied carefully. "They're still finding their way through grief, as I imagine you are." His fingers tightened around his cup. "I don't have the luxury of grief, Miss Miller. This ranch doesn't run itself. And yet, grief finds us regardless of our wishes." She spoke from experience, the memory of Richard's passing still sharp despite the months that had passed. Thomas studied her face. "You speak as someone who knows. My husband died this past winter." The admission came easily, perhaps because of her fatigue. "Pneumonia." "I'm sorry." His voice softened. "Catherine caught fever after Rebecca's birth. She never recovered." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken pain beneath his words. "Your children are lucky to have their father, even if he's busy with the ranch." "Am I their father, though?" Thomas asked bitterly. "Or just the man who puts food on their table and barely knows them anymore?" "You were with them tonight," Sarah pointed out. "Really with them. I saw how they responded." He looked down at his coffee. "Because of you. You made them presentable. Interesting." "They were always interesting, Mr. Thompson. They just needed someone to listen." She rose, taking her empty cup to the sink. "If you'll excuse me, I should retire. Morning comes early." Thomas stood as well, suddenly awkward. "Of course. Your room is at the end of the hall, across from the children's." Sarah paused. "You expect me to stay here?" "I assumed I would return to town each evening." "Town is 5 miles away, Miss Miller. The position has always included lodging." His brow furrowed. Is that a problem? Her mind raced. Her children, alone in that cabin night after night? Impossible. I have arrangements in town. Personal matters. What personal matters could be so pressing that you'd walk 10 miles round trip each day? His tone sharpened with suspicion. Sarah lifted her chin. That's not relevant to my position here, Mr. Thompson. They stared at each other, tension crackling between them like heat lightning. Finally, Thomas shook his head. Very well, but I won't have you walking these roads after dark. Walter can drive you to town when he delivers the mail and pick you up in the morning. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Thank you. That's acceptable. Thomas nodded stiffly. Good night, Miss Miller. Good night, Mr. Thompson. As Walter drove her toward town in the wagon that evening, Sarah directed him to stop at the crossroads. I can walk from here, she insisted. The old ranch hand frowned. Miss Sarah, it's not safe for a lady to be walking alone this time of night. I'll be fine, Walter. My lodgings are just beyond those trees. She gestured vaguely toward the direction of her cabin. What time will you return in the morning? First light, he promised. But I still don't like leaving you here. Sarah patted his weathered hand. Your concern does you credit. I'll be waiting right here tomorrow. She waited until the wagon's lantern disappeared around the bend before hurrying toward the cabin. The children were asleep when she arrived, all except Peter, who sat vigilant by the door with Richard's old hunting knife in his lap. You're late, he accused, his young face too serious for his years. I know, darling. The arrangement is more complicated than I expected. She explained about living at the ranch, about Walter's transportation. I'll need to leave before dawn to meet him. Peter's face fell. So we'll see you even less. Sarah gathered him into her arms. This boy who'd had to grow up too fast. Just for a little while. I'm bringing more food tomorrow, and soon we'll have enough saved for a proper place in town. But as she lay awake that night, surrounded by her sleeping children, Sarah wondered how long she could maintain this deception. The Thompson children were already attaching themselves to her, and if she was honest, she was growing fond of them too. And Thomas. There was something about his gruff exterior and hidden pain that called to her. The first rays of dawn found Sarah already at the crossroads, a handkerchief of leftover biscuits from the previous day's supper hidden in her pocket. Walter arrived precisely as promised, helping her into the wagon with old-fashioned courtesy. You're looking tired this morning, Miss Sarah, he observed as they traveled toward the ranch. Everything all right in town? Just adjusting to new routines, she replied evasively. Tell me more about the ranch, Walter. How long have you worked for Mr. Thompson? The old cowboy was happy to share stories of the ranch's early days. How Thomas had built it from nothing after coming west as a young man. How he'd fallen in love with Catherine, the schoolteacher from town, and how devastated he'd been when she died. Never seen a man so broken, Walter said softly. Threw himself into work like he was trying to outrun his own shadow. Barely spoke to anyone for months, even the children. He seems to care for them deeply, Sarah observed. Oh, he does. Just doesn't know how to show it anymore. Catherine was the one who handled all that, the loving, the teaching, the discipline. Thomas provided, protected. Now he's trying to do it all and failing by his own measure. Sarah considered this as they approached the ranch. The morning sun illuminated the white-clapboard house, making it seem almost welcoming. Thomas was already in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. He paused as the wagon approached, lifting a hand in greeting. The day fell into a rhythm breakfast for the ranch hands. Lessons for the children, lunch preparation, cleaning, and 100 small tasks that filled the hours. Sarah worked efficiently, always aware of the passing time, planning her midday escape to check on her own children. When the lunch dishes were cleared and the Thompson children engaged in quiet activities, Sarah approached Thomas as he sat at his desk reviewing ledgers. "Mr. Thompson, I need to step out for an hour or so." He looked up, clearly surprised. "Again? Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, just personal business that requires attention." She twisted her hands in her apron. "The children are resting, and I've already started preparations for supper." Thomas studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "This personal business seems quite demanding, Miss Miller." "It's important," she insisted, holding his gaze. After a long moment, he nodded. "Be back before the children wake from their naps." Sarah hurried along the now familiar path, her steps quick with anxiety and anticipation. She'd managed to secure more substantial provisions today: a whole loaf of bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples. The weight in her pockets was reassuring. The cabin was quiet when she approached, too quiet. "Peter?" she called softly. "Mary? Michael?" No response came. Heart racing, Sarah pushed open the door to find the cabin empty. The children's few possessions still in place, but no sign of where they'd gone. Panic rose in her throat as she stepped back outside, scanning the surrounding forest. A child's laugh echoed from the direction of the stream that ran behind the cabin. Sarah followed the sound, relief flooding through her as she spotted her children playing in the shallow water, Peter supervising as the younger ones splashed and giggled. "Mama!" Hannah spotted her first, running with wet bare feet across the grassy bank. Sarah gathered her youngest into her arms, breathing in her sun-warmed scent. "You scared me, not being in the cabin. It was so hot," Peter explained, "and they were restless. I thought the water would cool them off." "It's all right," Sarah assured him, understanding his decision. She distributed the food she'd brought, watching with a mother's satisfaction as her children ate their fill for the first time in days. "Tell us about the ranch," Mary requested, her curiosity always insatiable. "Are there horses? Cows?" "The finest horses you've ever seen," Sarah confirmed, describing the Thompson ranch in terms she knew would captivate them. "And the house has real glass windows in every room, even upstairs." "When can we see it?" Michael asked around a mouthful of apple. Sarah's smile faltered. "Not yet, sweetheart. Mr. Thompson only hired me, not all of us." "But he has children too," James pointed out with a 6-year-old's logic. "Don't they want friends?" The innocent question pierced Sarah's heart. Her children were isolated here with only each other for company. How long could she keep them hidden away like this? "I have to go back soon," she said, avoiding the question. "Peter, make sure everyone stays close to the cabin. I'll return this evening with more food." The walk back to the ranch was heavy with conflicted emotions. Sarah knew her deception couldn't continue indefinitely. Sooner or later, someone would discover her secret, most likely Thomas himself, whose sharp eyes missed little. As she approached the ranch house, she saw Thomas on the porch with little Rebecca on his knee, reading to her from a picture book. The sight stopped Sarah in her tracks. The intimidating rancher was transformed by his daughter's presence, his deep voice gentle as he pointed out illustrations, his large hand carefully turning the delicate pages. Rebecca spotted her first. "Miss Sarah, Papa's reading about bears." Thomas looked up, his expression unguarded for once. The smile he'd been sharing with his daughter lingered as his eyes met Sarah's, and something warm and unexpected fluttered in her chest. "I trust your business is concluded?" he asked, though without the suspicion of earlier. "For now," she replied, climbing the porch steps. "Thank you for watching, Rebecca." "She's my daughter," he said simply, "not a burden." Sarah felt the gentle rebuke in his words. "I never suggested otherwise, Mr. Thompson." His expression softened. "Thomas, if you're to be part of this household, even temporarily, Mr. Thompson seems unnecessarily formal." "Thomas," she repeated, testing the name. And you must call me Sarah. Rebecca squirmed off her father's lap and took Sarah's hand. Can we bake cookies now? You promised yesterday. So I did. Sarah smiled down at the little girl. Shall we see if Emma and Jonah want to help? The afternoon passed pleasantly in domestic activities. Sarah taught Emma and Jonah how to measure flour and crack eggs without getting shells in the batter, while Rebecca happily punched her small fist into lumps of dough. The kitchen filled with laughter and the sweet scent of molasses cookies, a luxury Sarah's own children hadn't enjoyed in months. Thomas appeared in the doorway as they were removing the last batch from the oven. He leaned against the frame, watching silently, a complicated expression on his face. Papa! Jonah noticed him first. We made cookies. I cracked the eggs all by myself. I can see that, Thomas replied, nodding toward the boy's flour-streaked face. You were baking well, son. Emma approached her father with a plate of cookies. Try one. Miss Sarah says the secret is extra molasses. Thomas accepted a cookie, his eyes meeting Sarah's over his daughter's head. Delicious, he declared after taking a bite. Your mother would be proud of you, Emma. The girl beamed at the rare praise, and Sarah saw how Thomas was trying, in his own way, to bridge the distance between himself and his children. Supper that evening was a lively affair, the children eager to tell their father about their day's activities. Sarah observed the interactions, noting how Thomas made an effort to respond to each child, to ask questions, to be present in a way Walter had suggested was rare. After the children were settled in bed, Sarah found Thomas on the porch again, smoking a pipe and staring out at the darkening landscape. She stepped outside, the evening air cool against her skin. They're asleep, she reported. Even Rebecca, though she insisted on sleeping with one of the cookies under her pillow. Thomas chuckled, the sound rusty as if rarely used. Catherine used to say Rebecca would bargain with the angels if they'd listen. She's a determined little soul. Sarah settled into the chair beside him. All your children are remarkable, Thomas. You should be proud. Catherine deserves the credit. I was always too busy with the ranch. His voice held regret. Still am, I suppose. It's never too late to change that. He turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from the window. You're an unusual woman, Sarah Miller. Most people in these parts are too intimidated to speak so plainly to me. Perhaps most people haven't seen you reading picture books to your daughter, she replied with a small smile. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the sounds of night creatures filling the air around them. Walter will take you to town soon, Thomas said eventually. Unless you'd reconsider staying here? The room is prepared. Sarah's heart sank. I can't. I'm sorry. His expression closed off again. Your personal business in town. Yes. Must be important to draw you away each night. There was something in his tone, not quite accusation, but close. A gentleman caller, perhaps? Sarah laughed despite herself. Hardly. Family, then? The question hit too close to home, and Sarah stood abruptly. I should gather my things. Walter will be waiting. Thomas rose as well, towering over her in the darkness. You're hiding something, Sarah. I'm not sure what, but I've lived long enough to recognize secrets. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything about her children, about their desperate circumstances, about how she was growing to care for his family even while divided from her own. But fear held her tongue. If he dismissed her, where would they go? How would they eat? We all have secrets, she said finally. Some are simply not ours alone to share. The rumble of wagon wheels announced Walter's arrival, saving her from further questioning. Thomas stepped back, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Sarah. Days passed in this manner, Sarah arriving at dawn, caring for the Thompson household, slipping away when possible to check on her children, then returning to town each evening. The arrangement was exhausting but brought rewards. Her children were eating regularly now, and the Thompson children were thriving under her attention. Thomas, too, was changing. He made efforts to be present at meals, to spend time with his children in the evenings, to engage in conversations that weren't solely about the ranch. And increasingly, his gaze followed Sarah as she moved through the house, his eyes reflecting confusion, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster when she caught him looking. A week into this arrangement, disaster struck. Sarah arrived at the crossroads before dawn to find no sign of Walter. After waiting nearly an hour, she set out on foot for the ranch, knowing the children would be waking soon, expecting breakfast. She arrived to find the ranch in chaos. Walter had been thrown from his horse the previous evening while checking fence lines. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but he wouldn't be driving anyone to town for at least a week. "I'm sorry, Miss Sarah," he apologized from his bed in the bunkhouse. "Thomas says he'll take you himself this evening." The prospect of Thomas discovering her secret filled Sarah with dread, but she focused on the day's tasks, hoping to find a solution before nightfall. The children demanded her attention. A visiting cattle buyer required feeding, and by mid-afternoon, she still hadn't found an opportunity to slip away to check on her waiting family. As she kneaded dough for the evening bread, Thomas entered the kitchen. "I need to ride out to the north pasture. A cougar's been after the calves." Sarah nodded, relief flooding through her. If he was gone, perhaps she could borrow a horse, check on her children, and return before he was any the wiser. "The children are with Mrs. Peterson from town. She came to visit Walter and agreed to watch them for an hour." He hesitated. "I thought, perhaps you'd like to accompany me? The view from North Ridge is spectacular this time of year." The invitation caught her completely off guard. I couldn't possibly. There's supper to prepare and, Sarah." His voice was gentle. "One meal can be simple, and you've worked tirelessly since you arrived. Surely you deserve an hour's pleasure." The word pleasure on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. It had been so long since anyone had considered her needs, her enjoyment. "All right," she heard herself say, "but just for an hour." Thomas smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I'll saddle Daisy for you. She's gentle as a lamb." The ride to North Ridge was indeed spectacular. Spring had turned the valley lush with new growth, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in purple and gold. Thomas pointed out landmarks: the silver ribbon of the river, the distant mountains still capped with snow, the boundaries of his property stretching for miles. "It's beautiful," Sarah admitted, breathing deeply of the clean mountain air. "I can see why you love it here." Thomas watched her, something warm in his expression. "It was my dream since boyhood. A place of my own, land to work, a legacy to build. You've succeeded admirably. In some ways." He guided his horse closer to hers. "In others, I've failed spectacularly." Sarah understood he was speaking of his family. "You haven't failed, Thomas. You've simply been lost for a while. I see how you're finding your way back to them." They reached the ridge and dismounted, tethering the horses to a stunted pine. Thomas spread his coat on a flat rock for Sarah to sit, and they gazed out over the vast landscape in companionable silence. "Catherine loved this spot," Thomas said finally. "We picnicked here when we were courting. Later, we brought the children in summer. You must miss her terribly." "Every day." He turned to look at Sarah. "But the sharpness of it has changed recently. Since you came." Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Thomas, I'm not a man given to flowery speech, Sarah, but you've brought something back to my home that I thought died with Catherine. Laughter. Warmth." He paused. Hope. Her heart raced as he moved closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. I find myself thinking of you even when you're not there, wondering about your life in town, about your secrets. Thomas, please. She couldn't let this happen, couldn't let him care for her while she continued her deception. I'm not asking for your secrets. Not yet. His voice was low, intimate. I'm asking if what I feel between us is real, or merely my imagination. Sarah knew she should pull away, maintain the distance that her situation demanded. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her body making the decision her mind resisted. It's real, she whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deepening as she responded. Sarah felt herself melting into him, into the strength and warmth of him, into the promise of something she'd thought forever lost to her. When they finally broke apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Come back to the ranch tonight, Sarah. Stay. Reality crashed back upon her like ice water. I can't. He pulled back slightly, studying her face. What holds you in town, Sarah? What is so important that you cannot stay where? He hesitated, then committed himself. Where you are wanted. The moment for truth had arrived, but as Sarah opened her mouth to confess, a distant sound caught her attention. Riders approaching, fast. Thomas heard it too, his body tensing as he stepped protectively in front of her. Stay here, he commanded, moving toward the horses. 3 men appeared over the rise, their horses lathered with exertion. Sarah recognized one as Thomas's foreman, Jake. Mr. Thompson, Jake called. Fire at the east cabin. We spotted smoke from the south range. Sarah's world tilted. The east cabin, her cabin, where her children were waiting. How bad? She heard Thomas ask, his voice suddenly distant through the roaring in her ears. Just starting when we spotted it, but with this wind. Jake shook his head. Sarah was moving before conscious thought formed, untethering Daisy with trembling hands. Sarah, wait. Thomas reached for her reins. It's too dangerous. My children are in that cabin. The words escaped in a desperate cry as she swung into the saddle. My 5 children, Thomas. Understanding and shock transformed his face, but Sarah couldn't wait for his reaction. She dug her heels into Daisy's sides, urging the mare down the ridge toward the column of smoke now visible in the distance. The ride was a blur of terror and prayer. Sarah pushed Daisy harder than the gentle mare had likely ever been ridden, her thoughts solely on her children. Behind her, she heard hoofbeats, Thomas and his men following, but she couldn't slow, couldn't wait. As she crested the final hill, the sight before her stopped her breath. The cabin was engulfed in flames, the dry timber consumed by hungry fire. But what seized her heart were the 5 small figures huddled at a safe distance, watched over by a tall ranch hand she recognized as one of Thomas's men. Mama! Peter spotted her first, running toward her as she practically fell from the saddle. Sarah gathered all 5 into her arms at once, tears streaming down her face as she counted and recounted them, assuring herself all were safe. What happened? How did the fire start? Hannah knocked over the lamp, Mary explained, her face streaked with soot. It caught the blankets and then the walls. Tim found us, Peter added, gesturing toward the ranch hand. He was checking fence lines and saw the smoke. Thomas arrived moments later, dismounting in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. His eyes took in the scene, Sarah surrounded by 5 children, the burning cabin, his ranch hand hovering nearby. Everyone accounted for? He asked him sharply. Yes, sir. Got them out just as the roof started to catch. Thomas nodded once, then turned to Sarah. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been hurt. 5 children, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You have 5 children. Sarah stood, positioning herself protectively before her brood. Yes. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the crackling fire and the children's soft crying the only sounds between them. Then Thomas turned to his men. Jake, ride back to the ranch. Send the wagon with blankets, food, and water. He looked back at Sarah and her children. They'll be coming home with us. Sarah's legs nearly buckled with relief. Thomas. He shook his head once, sharply. Later. Right now, these children need shelter and care. The journey to the Thompson ranch was made in relative silence. Sarah and her children in the wagon that arrived, Thomas riding alongside. Her younger children, exhausted by fear and excitement, dozed against her, while Peter remained vigilant, watching Thomas with wary eyes. Sarah's mind raced with anxiety. Thomas had offered shelter, but for how long? What would happen when the shock wore off and anger took its place? She had deceived him, lied by omission since the day they met. As they approached the ranch, the Thompson children burst from the house, clearly alarmed by the commotion. They stopped short at the sight of 5 unfamiliar children in the wagon. Miss Sarah, Emma called uncertainly. What's happening? Thomas dismounted and gathered his 3 to him. Emma, Jonah, Rebecca. Miss Sarah has brought her family to stay with us for a while. Her home was damaged in a fire today. Her family? Jonah looked confused. But Miss Sarah doesn't have a family. She lives in town. Actually, Sarah said, helping her children down from the wagon, this is my family, my children. She introduced them one by one, watching as understanding dawned on the Thompson children's faces. But where have they been? Emma demanded, always quick to the heart of matters. Sarah glanced at Thomas, who met her gaze steadily. We'll explain everything, he said. But first, let's get everyone inside. It's been a difficult day. What followed was a flurry of activity baths for Sarah's soot-stained children, borrowed nightclothes, a hastily prepared meal, and the arrangement of sleeping quarters. The Thompson house had 2 spare bedrooms. Sarah and Hannah would take one, while her boys would share the other. Mary would stay with Emma, who was delighted at the prospect of a girl her own age in the house. Through it all, Thomas was efficient, authoritative, and completely inscrutable. He directed the arrangements, ensured everyone's comfort, but spoke directly to Sarah only when necessary. The warmth of their moment on the ridge seemed a distant dream. It wasn't until all 8 children were finally settled for the night that they found themselves alone in the kitchen. Sarah stood by the sink, her hands busy with a dishcloth, though the dishes were long since clean. Thomas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. Why didn't you tell me? He asked finally, his voice low. Sarah set down the cloth and turned to face him. Would you have hired me if I had? That's not the point. It's exactly the point, Thomas. She moved toward him, stopping an arm's length away. I needed this job. My children needed to eat. After Richard died, the bank took everything. We came west with nothing but hope, and found not even that. His expression softened slightly. You could have asked for help. Asked whom? The town that looks at a widow with 5 children and sees only burden? The ranchers who need strong men, not a woman who can barely shoe a horse. She shook her head. I did what I had to do. You let me believe you were. He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. Available, Sarah supplied. I am a widow, Thomas. That much is true. But with 5 children. He ran a hand through his hair. 5 children you kept hidden in that dilapidated cabin while you cared for mine. The truth of it, stated so plainly, filled Sarah with shame. Yes. Thomas moved toward the window, staring out into the darkness. What will you do now? The cabin is gone. I don't know, she admitted. We have some money saved from my wages. Perhaps enough for a room in town until I can find another position. He turned back to her, his expression troubled. Another position? You'd leave the ranch. I assumed. Sarah faltered. After my deception, I thought you wouldn't want me to stay. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible in the tension of his shoulders, the furrow of his brow. The children would miss you, he said finally. I would miss them too. Very much. She paused. And I would miss other things about the ranch. Their eyes met, and the connection that had sparked on the ridge flared between them again, complicated now by revelations and unspoken questions. Stay, Thomas said, the word both command and plea. All of you, at least until we can determine a better arrangement. Relief washed through Sarah. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he warned. 8 children under one roof may have us both begging for the simplicity of deception within a week. Despite everything, Sarah laughed, and after a moment, Thomas joined her, the tension between them easing just slightly. The following days were a chaotic adjustment for both families. The Thompson children, after their initial surprise, welcomed the newcomers with the resilience of youth. Emma was delighted to have Mary as both playmate and protégé, teaching her the ranch routines with the authority of an older sister. Jonah and James, close in age, became instant allies in boyhood adventures. Peter, serious beyond his years, shadowed Thomas and the ranch hands, eager to learn and prove his worth. Even little Rebecca and Hannah formed a bond, playing elaborate games with dolls and creating their own secret language. Sarah watched these mergers with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Her children were blossoming in this new environment, with proper beds, regular meals, and the companionship of others. But the arrangement remained temporary in her mind, a charitable interlude before reality reasserted itself. Thomas remained an enigma. During the day, he was cordial but distant, addressing Sarah with formal politeness when they crossed paths. With the children, all 8 of them, he showed unexpected patience, answering endless questions about ranch life and even allowing the older boys to accompany him on minor tasks around the property. But in the evenings, after the children were asleep, something shifted. He would find Sarah on the porch or in the kitchen, and they would talk about their lives, their losses, their hopes for their children. He never mentioned their kiss on the ridge, nor did he attempt to repeat it, but something was building between them nonetheless, a current of understanding and attraction that neither could fully deny. 2 weeks after the fire, Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard when Thomas approached, his expression serious. I've been thinking, he began without preamble, about your situation. Sarah's hands stilled on the damp sheet. Oh, the children need stability, education, a proper home. He gestured toward the house. They seem to have settled here. They have, she agreed cautiously. Everyone has been very kind. Thomas shifted, uncharacteristically uncomfortable. What I'm trying to say, Sarah, is that this arrangement could become permanent. Her heart skipped. Permanent? You mean continue as your housekeeper? No. He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. I mean as my wife. The sheet slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers. Your wife. It makes sense, he continued, his tone almost businesslike. You need security for your children. I need someone to care for mine. We get along well enough. Sarah stared at him, speechless. Of all the scenarios she'd imagined for her future, this clinical proposal had never figured. You're asking me to marry you out of convenience? Thomas frowned. It would be more than convenient. It would be practical, beneficial for all concerned. Beneficial? She repeated, hurt blooming in her chest. Like a business arrangement. Sarah. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. No, Thomas. I understand perfectly. She retrieved the fallen sheet, her movements stiff. You need a mother for your children, and I'm available. My circumstances make me grateful for any offer, however lacking in certain considerations. His frown deepened. What considerations? Love, Thomas. She met his gaze directly. Affection, mutual regard. The things that make a marriage more than an economic agreement. A flush rose in his face. I didn't think, given your circumstances, that I would want to be loved? Sarah shook her head sadly. Or that I would expect a man like you to love a penniless widow with 5 children? Sarah, please. He stepped forward again. I'm not explaining myself well. No, you're not. She turned away, blinking back tears. Please excuse me. The children will be returning from their walk with Emma soon, and I need to start supper. She fled to the kitchen, her heart pounding painfully. Thomas's proposal should have been a relief security for her children, a home, a respected position in the community. Why, then, did it feel like such a disappointment? Because, she admitted to herself as she aggressively kneaded dough for the evening bread. Somewhere in these past weeks she had begun to hope for more. The conversations on the porch, the shared laughter over the children's antics, that breathtaking kiss on the ridge, they had awakened feelings she'd thought buried with Richard. And Thomas's businesslike proposal had effectively killed those tender shoots of emotion. Supper that evening was a strained affair. The children chattered happily, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Thomas was quieter than usual, his eyes frequently finding Sarah across the table, his expression troubled. After the meal, as Sarah supervised the children's preparations for bed, Thomas disappeared from the house. Through the bedroom window, she saw him walking toward the barn, shoulders hunched against the evening breeze. Once the children were settled, Sarah found herself restless, unable to face Thomas if he returned to the house. Instead, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside, intending to walk off her troubled thoughts. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Sarah walked aimlessly, eventually finding herself near the small family cemetery where Catherine Thompson and the infant son who had preceded her in death were buried. She approached the neat white fence hesitantly, feeling like an intruder. But something drew her forward, a need to acknowledge the woman whose absence had shaped this family she'd come to care for so deeply. I'm not trying to replace you, she said softly to the marble headstone. I hope you know that. She would have liked you. Sarah whirled to find Thomas standing a few paces away, his face shadowed in the moonlight. I'm sorry, she stammered. I shouldn't have come here. Why not? Catherine was never one for keeping people at a distance. He moved to stand beside her at the fence. She would have welcomed you and your children with open arms. Sarah couldn't find words to respond, her emotions too tangled to express. I hurt you today, Thomas said after a moment. That wasn't my intention. I know. No, you don't. He turned to face her fully. Sarah, I'm not a man accustomed to speaking of feelings. Catherine used to say I could discuss cattle prices for hours but couldn't say, I love you, without looking like I was being strangled. Despite herself, Sarah smiled at the image. When I proposed to you today, I did it all wrong, Thomas continued. I spoke of practicality because that felt safer than admitting the truth. Which is? Sarah hardly dared breathe. Thomas reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. That I've fallen in love with you, that I wake each morning eager to see your face. That watching you with all our children, yours and mine, makes me believe in second chances I never thought possible. Sarah's heart soared, but caution held her response. Thomas, are you certain? 5 additional children is no small matter. I've had 2 weeks to observe your children, Sarah. Peter with his serious responsibility, Mary and Michael with their curiosity and energy, James with his quick mind, little Hannah with her mischief. His lips curved in a genuine smile. They're remarkable, just like their mother. But marriage would be based on love, not convenience, he interrupted. Though I won't pretend the practical aspects aren't appealing as well. Our children already act like siblings. The ranch has room for all. And I... He paused, his voice deepening. I find myself unable to imagine this home without you in it. He released one of her hands to touch her cheek gently. I'm asking you to marry me, Sarah Miller. Not because it's practical, but because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you. Because the thought of you leaving makes it hard to breathe. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as joy welled within her. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Thomas. His kiss was everything their first had promised, tender yet passionate. A meeting of equals, a pledge of futures entwined. When they finally broke apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. We should tell the children, he murmured. Sarah laughed softly. In the morning. Some of them have been matchmaking for weeks. Emma, Thomas guessed with a groan. She's subtle as a stampede. And you're Jonah. And my Mary. Sarah nestled closer into his embrace. They've been dropping hints that would make a politician blush. Thomas's arms tightened around her. Smart children. Smarter than their father, apparently, who nearly ruined everything with talk of practicality. Not ruined, Sarah assured him. Just delayed. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the stars witnessing their new beginning. At the porch steps, Thomas paused, turning to face Sarah in the silver moonlight. I love you, he said, the words no longer strangled but flowing freely from his heart. And I love you, Sarah replied, standing on tiptoe to seal the declaration with a kiss. The announcement the following morning was met with cheers from the children, who seemed far less surprised than Sarah and Thomas had expected. Emma and Mary exchanged triumphant glances, while Jonah and James performed an impromptu victory dance around the breakfast table. Peter, ever serious, solemnly shook Thomas's hand and promised to help with the ranch work, sir. Even little Rebecca and Hannah understood enough to be excited, demanding to know if there would be cake. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on the ranch, with Walter recovered from his injuries proudly giving Sarah away. The ceremony was simple but joyful, with 8 children serving as attendants and half the county in attendance. Thomas's proposal might have begun awkwardly, but his vows were eloquent in their sincerity, bringing tears to eyes throughout the gathering. I once thought happiness was beyond my reach, he said, holding Sarah's hands before the minister. That love was something granted once in a lifetime, if a man was fortunate. You proved me wrong, Sarah Miller. You brought laughter back to my home and hope back to my heart. You showed me that family isn't defined by blood but by love. I pledge to cherish you and your children, our children, for all the days of our life together. Sarah's response was equally heartfelt. I came to you in deception but found truth in your arms. When I was most desperate, you offered not just shelter but understanding. Not just security but love. I pledge to stand beside you through all of life's challenges, to raise our children in love and laughter, to be your partner in all things until my last breath. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing in the ranch yard under strung lanterns. As twilight deepened into night, Sarah and Thomas found a moment alone on the porch, watching their children, all 8 of them, playing an elaborate game of tag among the cottonwoods. Are you happy, Mrs. Thompson? Thomas asked, his arm warm around her waist. Sarah leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her like summer sunshine. Completely. Are you? More than I ever thought possible. He kissed her temple gently. Though I may regret it when all 8 of them want different bedtime stories tonight. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and drawing smiles from those who heard it. "We'll manage. Together." And they did, building a life rich with challenges and joys, disagreements and reconciliations, hard work and well-earned rest. The Double T Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, and their family grew stronger with each passing season. A year later, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, who completed their already abundant family. Thomas, no longer remote but fully engaged in family life, proved to be as devoted to Sarah's 5 as to his own 3, and equally besotted with the new additions. The story of their unusual beginning became family legend, how Thomas hired Sarah to cook for his children, not knowing she had 5 of her own. How deception gave way to understanding. How tragedy opened the door to new love. It was a tale told and retold around the fireplace on winter evenings, embellished by the children as they grew, treasured as the foundation of their blended family. And on quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the ranch lay peaceful under starlight, Sarah and Thomas would often sit on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, their hands entwined, their hearts full with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive in unexpected packages, like a widow with 5 hungry children, or a grieving rancher too busy to know his own loneliness. In finding each other, they had found themselves, and in joining their broken families, they had created something whole and beautiful, a legacy of love that would endure long after the Montana Territory became a state, long after the Wild West was tamed, long after their own story passed into family legend.